Ever had a bird fly overhead and thought that could literally be anything? There's no color, no pattern, and just a dark shape across the sky. We've all been there, and here's the thing. That moment isn't a failure, it's an opportunity. Because when you can't rely on color, you rely on shape. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to use a bird's silhouette and figure out what kind of bird it is, even if you can't figure out what species it is. We're going to cover how to spot the body parts that matter, the most common bird silhouettes and how to read them, the best ways to practice this skill, and the one trick I use to make fast, confident IDs even when the bird is just a shadow. You won't always be able to identify a bird down to a species with silhouette, but it is a fun challenge and is definitely a great way to up your birding game. So let's get started. Here's the truth, color is fragile. It's great when you have good lighting and a still bird at close range, but when the bird is backlit in the shade or flying overhead, it can be kind of useless sometimes. And that's when the shape of a bird becomes your best friend. This is why experienced birders don't panic when they can't see plumage, because they're going to be reading the bird's posture, proportions, and behavior all from silhouette. Silhouette is mainly about pattern recognition, and once you learn it, it sticks. So here's what silhouette can or can't tell you. Silhouette usually won't get you down to a species. There are occasional instances where it will, but most of the time you're not going to be able to ID a specific warbler or sparrow just by shape, but it will help you narrow down to a family or group, rule out some obvious mismatches, or make some quick decisions when time is short. Silhouette will often give you the first layer of a bird's ID, and it's incredibly useful if that's all you've got. So when you're looking at a silhouette, not all body parts are equally helpful. You'll want to focus on the loud features that will reveal something first, and here's the big four. Head and bill shape. A small rounded head with no visible bill probably is a songbird, versus if it's a big bird with a big head and a big bill, chances are that that's going to be a raptor, or if it's a pretty tall bird with a very slender bill, that's probably going to be a shorebird. Next, you want to focus on body size and posture. Is it upright like a thrush, or is it chunky like a duck, or maybe even like streamlined like a swift? And then third, you want to focus on tail shape. This is huge. This can be huge. Tail shape is definitely overlooked, I think, with bird ID, but it can be huge, especially with sparrows. You want to look at whether or not there's a fork in the tail, or how deep that fork is. If it's squared off, the grasshopper sparrow is a pretty easy bird to identify by silhouette because it's got this chunky head, a chunky bill, and then a very short squared off tail. You want to look at the length of the wings, the width of the wings, just the overall shape, like whether or not the wings appear to be rounded, and then also the primary feathers are those feathers right at the edge of the wing. It's like for the turkey vulture, it's going to be spread out like fingers, but for some hawks, they're going to keep them more closed. And then a pro tip here would be to also pay attention to birds' behavior. A lot of hawks can be separated just by how quickly they fly, whether or not like they do 3 flaps and then glide. The gray hawk has a pretty distinctive flight pattern, so you can identify a lot of birds just by how they fly. Woodpeckers typically have pretty strong undulating flight where they go up and down like that, and so paying attention to flight style and just overall a bird's behavior can be very helpful too. So now let's walk through some silhouettes that you're actually going to see in the field. We'll cover 8 main groups of birds and just what their silhouettes would look like. So the first one we have here is hawks. They typically have long tails, broad, long wings, and then typically a pretty big head. Most hawks are seen soaring, so their flight can vary from slow glides to fast flaps. It really just depends on the species. Smaller hawks are typically going to flap more often compared to larger hawks. That's really true for all birds. Bigger birds are going to fly slower compared to smaller birds. Next one is warblers, typically small chunky birds with a small bill and then usually a long tail. Here we've got another warbler. The last one was a Wilson's warbler. This one is a Blackburnian warbler. So still a pretty chunky bird. Different posture here, so they can change their posture a little bit. But most of the time, you've got a small chunky bird with a long tail and then a short bill. Next one is a duck, pretty recognizable silhouette. Compared to geese, they're going to be a little bit smaller, a little chunkier, and then generally they have smaller necks too. But all ducks have a long bill and then overall just a pretty distinctive shape. Next one is herons. This is a great blue heron. Long neck, long bill, and usually long legs. Some birds like the green heron or black-crowned night heron are going to be shorter, but they're still going to have, proportionally speaking, pretty long bills and long legs. Next is swallows. We have here on the left a barn swallow, and I believe this one here is a tree swallow. All swallows have large, broad wings that typically come off to a point. Barn swallow's got this deep fork in its tail. And then the tree swallow has more of a squared off tail that can appear rounded. They use their tails to balance while flying, so it really just depends on what view you get. But generally, a pretty long tail compared to how big the bird is. They're not necessarily large birds, but proportionally speaking, they're going to have long wings and a long tail. And then all swallows are pretty small. I think the barn swallow is one of the largest, and they are not that big of a bird. Next one is woodpeckers. All woodpeckers have pretty large bills, big head, and then usually this upright posture. They're usually always on trees. They also generally have pretty long tails because they use their tails to balance on trees, and so that can be a good way to tell them apart. And also, if a bird's banging its head into a tree, that's probably going to be a woodpecker. I don't know of any other family of birds that does that. Next one is a thrush. All thrushes have this upright posture, a medium-sized bill, and then a medium-sized tail. Pretty round birds, and then, like I said, they're always going to have this upright posture. Next family of birds is flycatchers. Flycatchers usually have an upright posture, pretty rounded head. Some of them have more of a crest than others. Always a long tail, and then their bill size can vary. The Acadian flycatcher right here has the longest bill out of all the impid flycatchers, but usually they always have a pretty long bill. You don't need perfect lighting or exotic birds to practice this, you just need to build some visual memory, and so here's how to do it. Tip number 1 is to watch birds at sunset or sunrise. The lighting at this time naturally backlights the birds, so you're going to see silhouettes that way. And then also a good way to practice would be to sketch some bird shapes. Draw from memory, and you don't have to worry about being perfect, you're just trying to get some reps in and just try to practice memorizing what birds look like. It's a great skill to become a better birder. And also pay attention to birds while they're at your feeder. You can learn a lot by bird shapes, especially when they're close to you at a feeder. So that's also a great way to practice. So here is my favorite silhouette trick, and that is wing to body ratio plus tail shape. When a bird zips by you and you've got half a second to make the call, these are the two things that I look for. And here's why. Because they're fast, clear, and hard to miss. Raptors have long wings and a small body and then a long tail, and swallows have a tiny body and then huge pointed wings, and then some, like the barn swallow, have a forked tail, while others have a more squared off tail. Herons have really long wings and then really long legs, and so those two clues will instantly rule out a lot of possibilities. And so remember, you're not trying to get a perfect ID from a silhouette, you're just trying to get going in a confident direction, and also it's just a fun way to practice birding and get better. So start noticing bird silhouettes on your next walk and watch how birds fly, study their posture, check wing shapes. You'll start seeing things that you never noticed before. If you found this video helpful, go and tap that like button so I know to make more of these types of videos, and subscribe if you want to get better at birding. And also check out this video right here because YouTube thinks it's the best video on my channel for you to watch right now.